Hello everyone! This is Global Fashion Workshop. I remind you that we post new videos every day. I also want to remind you that some of my video courses are already available. Buy them if you haven't done it yet. I would really appreciate your support. Today we'd like to show you how to edge a sleeve with a bias binding and to make a loop. This is a mock-up of a sleeve. This is a 3/4 length sleeve. We've extended its width. You can make it as wide as you want. We'll gather the sleeve on the bottom later. The more you extend the width of the sleeve, the more you'll be able to gather it. What do we also need? A piece of fabric which is 2 centimeters wide, cut on the bias. We'll make a loop of it, the bias binding for edging the slit, and a strap which is 3 centimeters wide and cut on the crossways grain, which will be stitched to the sleeve. First of all, we need to make a slit. It will be placed in the center sleeve. Do not shift it to the back. It should be beautiful and visible. We also need to mark 3.5 centimeters for the gather, 1.5 centimeters for the binding, and 6 centimeters for a slit. It will be drop-shaped. This is why Nataly is drawing a round line. The widest part is 12 millimeters, or 1.2 centimeters. The slit will be very beautiful when edged with the bias binding. We can cut it now. Nataly is cutting the slit. Have a look at it. This is a drop-shaped slit. We're going to edge it. To do that, first we need to make the bias binding. Let's go to the ironing desk. We're using a special tool for making the bias binding. We've already shown you how to make it. Watch the video if you haven't done it yet. We've even shown you several ways to do it, with the use of the special equipment and without. The strap is 3 centimeters wide. We fold and press the edges to the center of it. Let's prepare the strap, which was cut on the crosswise grain, right away. We also need to fold and press the edges to the center. This is not a bias binding, so we don't use the tool. It's better to make the detail in advance. Well done. Let's go to the sewing machine. We need to edge the slit. The sleeve is placed wrong side up. Nataly is going to edge it with the bias binding. Be very attentive. This detail was cut on the bias, and this one on the crosswise grain. Do not mix them up. Be very attentive. We need to use the one which was cut on the bias.
Накладываем ее с изнаночной стороны рукава.
Attach it to the wrong side of the sleeve and make a seam. The width of the seam is 5 mm. Do not forget to make back stitches in the beginning of the seam. As I've said, the width of the seam is 5 mm. Stitch from the bias binding side. Be very careful when stitching the round part. The seam should be a bit tighter on top of the slit. This is a delicate work. Make sure not to make any faults. Be very attentive. We also need to make back stitches in the end of the seam. This is how the slit looks like now. Let's cut the extra pieces right away. We need to iron the detail next. Nataly presses the edges to the bias binding. It will make the future work easier. Ironing is very important. Make sure to iron the top of the slit accurately. Check if the seam is accurate and make sure that there are no pleats there. Well done. Let's tack the binding. First, make the notches in the round part of the slit. Let's start tacking. Nataly is taking the bias binding to the right side. We'll stitch it later. You can stitch it in the ditch or make a seam 1 mm away from the first one. In this case, the seam should be 1 mm wide both on the right side and the wrong side. It's not hard to distribute the binding because it was cut on the bias. Well done. We need to stitch it next. Be very attentive. Nataly is stitching from the right side. The width of the seam is 1 mm. Be very attentive when stitching the round part. Now we can remove the tacking and go to the ironing desk. Lay out the sleeve on the ironing desk and iron the slit accurately. The bias binding is accurate. If the fabric was not that strong, the binding would shrink even more. Be very attentive when ironing the slit. That's all for today. Next time, we'll continue working with the sleeve. We're Ira and Nataly. Subscribe to this channel. Thank you. Goodbye.